My name is Vesper York. I'm 35, an ER nurse in Bend, Oregon, and the single mom of Hall, who's 4, and Lana, who's 2. By the time my shift ended, I had already survived 16 hours of chaos, codes, crashes, trauma, and heartbreak. I was running on fumes, caffeine, and sheer willpower. My body ached, my mind was a fog, and yet I had to get home, pick up the kids, and somehow keep us all alive for the next day. I pulled into my parents' driveway in Redmond, the SUV's engine ticking as it cooled, the late morning sun sharp against my windshield. I'd sent a text an hour ago while still in the hospital parking lot. "Mom, can you watch the kids for 3 hours so I can crash? I'm running on empty." I knew they'd see it soon enough, but there was a sliver of hope. Maybe today would be different. I was wrong. The front door creaked open, and there she was, Gail Harper, my mother, in her faded robe, coffee mug in one hand, the other gripping the TV remote like a lifeline. Her eyes narrowed the second she saw me. Behind her, my father sat in his recliner, a half-empty cup of coffee on the armrest, eyes glued to the muted PGA tournament. His nod toward me was perfunctory, casual, like he was acknowledging a weather report, not his daughter standing there after 16 hours of pure exhaustion. "We're not watching them," she said flatly, the words rolling out like a final decree. Hall tugged at her leg instinctively, arms outstretched for the hug he always expected from Grandma. Lana squirmed in my arms, small fingers clutching my scrub top, sensing the tension and absorbing it like a sponge. I swallowed the rising heat in my chest, forcing calm into my voice. "It's just 3 hours," I said softly, almost pleading. "I've been up since yesterday morning. Multi-trauma rollover on the highway, 2 codes before dawn. I need sleep. Just 3 hours." Gail's expression didn't budge. "We're retired," she said. "We raised our kids. That part of our life is over." Sam, my father, didn't even look up. He clicked the remote to mute the volume but remained silent. Hull's little voice trembled as he asked, "Daddy home?" mixing his words like he always did when he was tired. Lana whined louder, her tiny face scrunched in distress. And in that moment, something inside me, something I'd buried beneath years of obligation, guilt, and habit, snapped. Not violently, not dramatically, just a clean, terrifyingly quiet break. I knelt down, adjusted Lana on my hip, and looked Gail straight in the eyes. "You're right," I said, my voice steady. "You're not responsible for my kids." Her lips twitched, in what I could have sworn was a smile of victory. I stood up slowly, taking a deliberate step back. "And I'm not responsible for your bills." The words landed heavier than I expected, almost shocking even me. Gail's face went pale, a flicker of alarm, breaking her stoic mask. Sam finally looked up, remote abandoned in his lap, eyes wide. "What did you just say?" he demanded, his voice trembling with disbelief. I didn't answer. I turned, buckled Hull into his booster, secured Lana in her car seat, and slid behind the wheel. The door shut with a solid thunk. As I backed out of the driveway, I caught their reflections in the rearview mirror. 2 figures shrinking on the porch, their expressions frozen somewhere between anger, shock, and something unspoken. Hall waved a small goodbye, and Lana fell asleep instantly, her tiny chest rising and falling against the car seat. The drive back to Bend was long, empty, and strangely liberating. The high desert landscape blurred past, golden brown and dotted with scrub brush, a reminder that life went on outside my family's suffocating grip. My phone buzzed, Gail's name flashing on the screen, once, twice, 3 times. I let it ring. The 4th time, a text appeared. "We need to talk." I deleted it without reading further. Back at our apartment, I carried the kids inside, tucking them into their cribs and beds for naps they desperately needed. Hull clutched his stuffed dinosaur, eyes already heavy with sleep, while Lana twirled her blanket in little fingers still damp with drool. I stood in the hallway for a long minute, listening to their quiet breathing. Finally, the silence was mine. I moved to the kitchen, poured myself a coffee I didn't drink, and opened my laptop. Years of quiet sacrifice had built a detailed spreadsheet that tracked every penny I'd spent covering family emergencies, bills, and debts. Not because I had to, but because I had believed family meant sacrifice. The first big entry was 7 years ago, when I was 28, fresh out of nursing school and terrified of making mistakes. Mom had called one evening, voice trembling over the phone. "The mortgage is behind, Vesper. The bank's sending letters. We just, we can't manage it this month." Dad had said nothing. I had logged in, set up auto pay for $1,500 a month, and told myself it would be temporary. That temporary had stretched into a 7-year pattern of financial and emotional labor. From paying off the SUV for my brother, whose divorce left him broke, to covering emergency medical bills for my extended family, I had become the invisible backbone, the human ATM nobody thanked. $52,000. That's what the spreadsheet said. $52,000 line by line, silently feeding their lifestyle, their comfort, their choices. All while my own bank account sat lean, my savings stagnant, my exhaustion ignored. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, letting the reality settle. No dramatic declarations, no shouting matches, just clarity. For the first time, I imagined life without their weight on my shoulders. I didn't have to pay the mortgage. I didn't have to finance their emergencies. I didn't have to be the silent martyr, the invisible wallet, the unquestioned caregiver. Outside, the Dashes River ran steady and indifferent, a quiet witness to the life I had carried alone. Inside, I sipped my cold coffee, fingers hovering over the keyboard, knowing that this was the moment things could change. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel it. Freedom, sharp and terrifying, but real. The apartment was quiet. Hall and Lana were finally asleep, and the soft hum of the heater filled the empty spaces between the walls. I sat at the kitchen counter, laptop open, coffee long gone cold, and stared at the spreadsheet I'd started 7 years ago. Every entry told a story, a memory, or a debt I'd silently carried. At first glance, it looked like numbers on a screen, neat rows of dates and payments. But underneath, it was a timeline of sacrifice. My life, siphoned away for people who treated it as if it were infinite. I clicked through the tabs slowly, the screen illuminating my tired face. January 2018. Mortgage payment $1,500. March 2018. SUV down payment $15,000. October 2019. Holtz school tuition advance $600. Every cell held a story, a decision I made because I thought it was the right thing to do, because I thought family meant unconditional support, and yet it had never been reciprocal. My father had been consistent in his silence, a spectator in his own home, nodding when convenient, indifferent when inconvenient. My mother had perfected the art of selective gratitude, voice shaking when asking for help, stern and unyielding when refusing to take responsibility. I realized now that this spreadsheet wasn't just numbers. It was a ledger of my life stolen quietly, line by line. I remembered the SUV clearly. My brother, Wells York, had called one evening, frantic. He had just divorced Haven Brooks, lost his construction gig, and his only car was falling apart faster than he could pay for repairs. "I need a reliable vehicle, Vez. Just something to get me to jobs in Prinville or Madras," he said, desperation tinging every syllable. I had hesitated for a split second. Then Mom's voice rang out on speakerphone, soft and persuasive. "Your brother can't get ahead without a decent vehicle. You're the one with a good paycheck." I had said yes, The car was $15,000, a used Ford Explorer with enough miles to remind anyone it was pre-owned but still reliable. Title in my name, monthly payments from my account. Mom insisted it was temporary. Wells promised to pay it off. The promise stretched, faded, and eventually vanished. Like so many things in this family, the temporary became permanent. My generosity assumed, my wallet expected. I scrolled further. Medical bills, emergency repairs, last-minute tuition, credit card balances, groceries, even utilities. Every payment had been mine. Not because I owed them, not because I wanted to, but because I had been groomed into believing it was my responsibility. My life, my choices, my freedom, all secondary to their comfort. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. The numbers stared back at me like cold, accusing eyes. $52,000. 52,000 stolen years of sleep, peace of mind, and mental energy. $52,000 I could have used for my children, for myself, for security. And yet, I had done it willingly, because I thought that's what family was. But tonight, after walking away from their porch, after saying the words I'd never dared before, something had shifted. The ledger was no longer just a record, it was a weapon, a map of the chains I could finally break. I pulled out a notebook from the drawer and started listing possibilities. How could I stop the automatic payments? Could I legally remove my name from the SUV title? Could I set boundaries that actually stuck? Each question I wrote felt like a breath of fresh air, a crack in the suffocating walls of obligation. I thought of Hole first. His little face, confused at Grandma's refusal to hug him, haunted me. And Lana, twisting her tiny fingers in my scrub top, trusting me to make the world safe. They deserved a mother who wasn't on the edge of collapse from carrying the weight of two households. They deserved a mother who slept through a morning without fear, who didn't flinch at the sound of a text from her parents, who wasn't a walking ATM disguised as a nurturer. I closed the notebook and scrolled further in the spreadsheet. Each entry was a memory. The night I paid the emergency dental bill for my cousin. The week I sent extra money so my parents' car wouldn't be repossessed. The months I covered Wells' rent when he claimed he couldn't find work. I could see the pattern now. Every sacrifice came with a smile on their faces, a soft thank you that felt almost scripted. And every time I hesitated or suggested limits, the subtle guilt appeared. Moments of cold disappointment, looks that said, "You owe us more, Vesper, more than you can give." The quiet apartment was suddenly too loud with realization. I had spent years thinking I was helping, thinking I was being generous, noble, loving, and yet, all that energy, all that money, all that mental and emotional labor had fed a system designed to take, never give back. A notification popped up on my phone. Another text from Mom. "We need to talk. Call us." I stared at it, finger hovering over the delete button. I didn't want to read it. I didn't want to argue. I didn't want to explain why I had walked away today. I had spent enough years explaining, justifying, begging, pleading. I deleted it. The quiet that followed was different this time. Not lonely, not empty. It was mine. I leaned back in the chair and let myself imagine what freedom could feel like. No autopay, no hidden debts, no surprise emergency bills to cover, no guilt, no fear, no exhaustion born from carrying someone else's life as if it were my own. I pictured us, Hole and Lana and me, without constant stress pressing down, mornings where I didn't wake up already depleted, nights where I could sleep without the weight of a family ledger looming over my chest. I imagined a future where I said no without fear, stop without guilt, this is mine without hesitation. A faint smile tugged at my lips. I had lived in a kind of invisible prison, but tonight I could almost see the bars bending. Almost. I didn't know exactly how to untangle all of it or what would happen when my parents realized I wasn't paying their bills anymore. I didn't know if Wells would scream, cry, beg, or silently fume. I didn't know if I could survive the emotional fallout, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I couldn't continue like this. Not for me, not for Hole, not for Lana. I closed the spreadsheet, turned off the laptop, and poured myself another cup of coffee, this one purely for comfort, not survival. Outside, the Dashes River ran as it always had, steady and indifferent, flowing toward an unknown future. Inside, for the first time in years, I let myself feel something like hope. Hope that one day soon, the ledger would no longer define me. Hope that the numbers on the screen would no longer dictate my choices. Hope that I could finally live a life without someone else's weight pressing on my shoulders. And most importantly, hope that my children could grow up seeing me strong, unafraid, and free. The sun had dropped lower, stretching shadows across the apartment walls, but I didn't move from my kitchen chair. Hall and Lana had finally settled, their tiny breathing patterns rhythmic and steady. The quiet was thick, comforting, and terrifying all at once. I had time, finally, to think without interruption. But the thoughts that flooded in weren't just about bills or spreadsheets. They were about everything I'd sacrificed. Every moment I'd given, every hour spent exhausted, every choice deferred for the comfort of someone else. I thought back to my first year out of nursing school, 28 years old, eager, ambitious, and naive. I had just started at St. Charles Hospital, my salary steady, my future bright, or so I believed. I remember Mom's voice trembling one evening over the phone. "Vesper, the mortgage is behind. We're getting letters. Please, can you help?" I had paused, hesitant. I had just started my life. I had rent, student loans, a tiny car payment, and daycare for Hollow. But her voice, so vulnerable, so pleading, pierced me. I logged into my bank account that night and set up autopay. $1,500. It's temporary, I told myself. That word, temporary, became a thread weaving through the next 7 years, binding me in invisible chains. From that first payment, the pattern was set. Requests turned into expectations. My brother Wells needed a car after his divorce. My parents reminded me softly that it was temporary and that my brother couldn't get ahead without a decent vehicle. I paid $15,000 down for a used Explorer, the title in my name. Wells promised he would pay me back. He never did. I could see it all now, like a montage of my adult life, each memory etched into my skin, a roadmap of the burdens I carried silently. There was the time I covered my cousin's emergency dental surgery, $2,300, because family helps family, she'd said, voice shaking, pleading. There was the time I paid my parents' water and electricity bills in the summer after Dad retired, reminding myself it's only for a few months. Then came school tuition advances for Hull and extra daycare when I was barely keeping up myself, and I thought, it's okay, I can do this. And every single time, my parents' gratitude was measured, conditional, often absent. Their silence was louder than any thank you could ever be. I was a fixture in their lives, a reliable source of money, stability, and emotional labor. My presence had been taken for granted, my exhaustion invisible. I remember a specific night, 3 years ago. It was raining, a cold winter storm, and I had just finished a 12-hour shift with 2 trauma codes back to back. My mother called, voice trembling, explaining that their car wouldn't start, and they needed to go grocery shopping. My first instinct was to say no, to finally set a boundary. But then I heard the familiar tremor in her voice, that manipulative mix of panic and expectation. I drove across Redmond, dragging my exhaustion behind me like a lead weight, only to watch them get in their warm, functioning car while I soaked through my jacket in the pouring rain. I'd always convinced myself I was doing the right thing. Family matters. Family comes first. But tonight, sitting in the kitchen, coffee untouched, I realized something my younger self could never have seen. I had been trained to feel guilty for setting boundaries. My parents had perfected the art of making me feel responsible for their lives while pretending that my sacrifices were just my duty. The spreadsheet on my laptop glowed, the numbers reflecting years of my energy, my money, my life. I realized it wasn't just about finances. It was about control. My parents had kept me in a cycle of exhaustion and obligation, ensuring I stayed tethered, always available, never free. I had been bound by love, by guilt, by habit, but most of all, by fear. Fear of being unloved, of being rejected, of being selfish. I thought about Hall and Lana. The kids hadn't asked to be part of this equation. They didn't deserve to watch their mother crumble under invisible debts and emotional manipulation. And suddenly, the stakes weren't just financial, they were moral. My children deserved a mother who was present, strong, and free from chains I could finally see. I picked up the spreadsheet again, tracing the entries. $52,000 over 7 years. Each number a story of compromise, sacrifice, and silent suffering. Each number a chain link. And now, each number also felt like a challenge, a record of all I had done, proving I could survive without being manipulated, without being taken for granted. My thoughts wandered to Wells again. I remembered arguing with him years ago about the Explorer. "Vess, it's only temporary," he'd said, arms raised, frustration and entitlement in every word. Temporary. That word had haunted me more than I realized. Everything he took for granted, every favor assumed, every payment I made, temporary was the lie they used to keep me under control. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. I had been living someone else's life for too long. I had been carrying debts, emotional labor, and guilt that weren't mine to bear. But for the first time, I realized I didn't have to anymore. I would face them. I would confront the past, not with yelling or drama, but with boundaries, with clarity, with the firm knowledge that their expectations no longer defined my life. I could feel it stirring inside me, a quiet but unstoppable strength, a realization that I was done being taken for granted. And yet, confronting the past wasn't just about money or boundaries. It was about reclaiming myself, about acknowledging every sacrifice I had made and understanding that they were not weaknesses. They were my strength. They had shaped me, yes, but they didn't own me. I thought of the evenings I had spent balancing my children on one arm, laptop on the table, phone buzzing with yet another request from my parents, and realized that every tear, every exhausted sigh, every missed opportunity for sleep or peace had been mine to control all along. I had just forgotten. Tonight, I remembered. I would stop paying the bills. I would stop carrying debts that weren't mine. I would stop letting my family treat me like an ATM, like a convenient solution to every crisis. And slowly, carefully, I would rebuild my life. Not for them, not for my parents, not for Wells, but for me, for Hall, for Lana, for the mother I wanted to be, not the servant they had trained me to be. Outside, the Dashes River ran cold and steady. The current didn't care about debt, guilt, or sacrifice. It just flowed, relentless and indifferent. Inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. Freedom. The first faint pulse of hope. I didn't know exactly how it would happen. I didn't know the fights, the arguments, or the drama that would come when they realized I was finally drawing a line. But I knew one thing. I had confronted the past, and it could no longer control my future. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a life that was truly mine. A life where my choices, my energy, my love, were for the people who deserved them most, my children and myself. And in that quiet kitchen, under the soft glow of the laptop screen, I whispered it to no one. I'm done being invisible. I'm done being the backbone of someone else's life. This ends now. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, painting the apartment in soft gold. Hall and Lana were still asleep, curled up in their beds, unaware that their lives were about to shift in ways even I couldn't fully articulate. I stood at the kitchen counter, laptop open, coffee steaming beside me. I knew the time had come, not just to think, not just to fantasize, but to act. For years, my life had been a ledger of everyone else's priorities. Mortgage payments, car repairs, medical emergencies, tuition, utilities, all covered by me. Every dollar carefully documented, every sacrifice meticulously recorded. And now, after walking away from my parents' porch, after finally speaking the words I had buried for years, "I'm not responsible for your bills," I felt a quiet surge of power, like waking up from a long, exhausting dream to find the world entirely mine. The first step was concrete. Stop the autopay. My parents' mortgage had been leaving my account every month for 7 years. I had justified it over and over. Temporary, they're retired, family matters. But now, temporary had stretched into $52,000, a number that felt both obscene and liberating. I logged into the bank account and froze the automatic payments. The confirmation pinged on my screen. My chest lifted, a weight I hadn't realized I carried since my 20s evaporating in an instant. Next came the SUV. Wells Ford Explorer sat in my parents' driveway, or had, until I realized the title was still in my name. That meant legal responsibility, insurance, liability, everything. My brother had assumed ownership in practice, but not on paper, relying on me to shield him from reality. I pulled up the DMV website, printing forms, making notes, calculating how to remove my name without triggering confrontation or legal chaos. I didn't have a complete plan yet, but I had direction, and that was enough. For the first time in years, I was steering my own life. I paused to listen to the soft breathing of Hole and Lana. Their innocence contrasted sharply with the turmoil I'd endured. Every moment I'd spent exhausted, every sacrifice I'd made for my parents, every dollar siphoned from my paycheck, it had all been done in part to create stability for them. But my children didn't deserve a mother who was a shell of herself, a woman defined by other people's needs rather than her own. They deserved a mother who could laugh, who could sleep through the night, who could be fully present. I took a deep breath and drafted a mental blueprint of the boundaries I would set. Financial boundaries. Stop funding parents' mortgage, utilities, or personal expenses. Remove my name from the SUV title. Require Wells to take responsibility for his own finances. Emotional boundaries. Limit phone calls, texts, and in-person visits that demanded my time or energy unnecessarily. No more guilt trips. Time boundaries. Protect my rest and recovery. Work. 16-hour shifts without fearing parental demands. Ensure Hole and Lana's needs are prioritized above anyone else's requests. Each boundary felt like a brick removed from a wall I had been trapped behind. By mid-morning, I drafted a spreadsheet of what needed immediate attention: bank accounts, bills, legal paperwork. I started with the simplest: notifying the bank of the mortgage autopay freeze, checking balances, printing statements, small victories, but tangible ones. The phone buzzed insistently. A text from Mom. "Vesper, we need to talk, now." I ignored it. Another, from Dad. "Call us immediately." Ignored. A third, Wells, demanding to know why I hadn't made the SUV payment. Ignored. The power of silence was intoxicating. For years I had been at their beck and call. Now, my unavailability was a shield, a declaration. I didn't need to explain, justify, or apologize. I only needed to exist within my own boundaries and let the consequences fall where they may. I spent the afternoon on research, reading legal documents, small claims procedures, and financial advice forums. I contacted a lawyer specializing in family financial disputes, setting up a consultation for next week. I wanted to ensure everything I did was airtight. No loopholes, no surprises. Every step I took solidified my independence. Later, I took Hall and Lana to the park, their laughter ringing through the air like a balm to my frayed nerves. For the first time in years, I felt completely present. I could push the swings, chase Lana around the sandbox, and not think about mortgages or car payments or anyone else's crises. Their joy was raw, unfiltered, and it reminded me why I had begun this process. I was reclaiming my life not out of spite, but out of love, for them and for myself. Returning home, I tackled the hardest task yet, facing the emotional manipulation embedded in my family dynamic. I drafted a letter, not to send immediately, but to clarify my intentions for myself. It read, "I am done. I am not your bank. I am not your crisis manager. I will help you when I choose to, and I will do so without compromising my children or my life. Your debts, your bills, your emergencies are yours. I am done carrying them. Do not test my boundaries. They are final." Even writing it felt liberating. The words had been unspeakable for years, whispered only in private. Now, in my own handwriting, they were real, solid, immutable. That night, after tucking Hall and Lana into bed, I sat at the kitchen counter and stared at the glowing laptop screen. The Dash's river flowed steadily outside, indifferent as ever, and I realized something profound. Freedom was terrifying. Independence was uncertain, but it was mine. The phone buzzed again. Mom, Dad, Wells, all of them. Demands, questions, threats. None of it reached me. I had built a shield around my peace, and for the first time I refused to let guilt break it. I poured a glass of water, sipping slowly, tasting victory in the quiet. I had confronted the past. I had taken the first steps toward independence, and now I would defend it fiercely. I looked over at Hull's dinosaur, Lana's tiny blanket, and felt something I hadn't in years: power. Not the power of money or control, but the power to define my life, to protect my children, and to live without someone else's weight crushing me. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the culmination of years of sacrifice and silent suffering. I had drawn my line, and I would not cross it again. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, resentment, perhaps anger. But tonight, for the first time, I was untouchable, free, independent. And that, I realized as I watched my children sleep peacefully, was the most radical, beautiful rebellion of all. The morning sun spilled into our apartment, warm and forgiving. Hall was already awake, bouncing around with his dinosaur in hand, while Lana toddled behind him, blanket clutched tightly. I watched them for a moment, their innocent energy filling the room like sunlight through the blinds. It struck me then how long it had been since I'd been able to witness this fully, without the weight of invisible obligations pressing down on me. The past few weeks had been transformative. I'd frozen autopay for my parents' mortgage, started the process to remove my name from the SUV title, and drawn firm boundaries around phone calls and visits. I'd contacted a lawyer to ensure Wells and my parents understood, legally, that I was no longer responsible for their debts or emergencies. Every step had been met with resistance, guilt trips, and surprise, but I had remained unmoved. I had found the voice I didn't realize I had lost. "Mom called again," Wells had said over the phone one night, frustration ringing in his voice. "She said you're abandoning them." I had smiled, a small, quiet thing. "I'm not abandoning them. I'm abandoning their expectations of me," I replied. That distinction mattered. One was about freedom, the other was about responsibility I never owed. At breakfast, Hall told me excitedly about a fort he'd built in the living room with his stuffed animals. Lana chimed in with her own version of the story, babbling in her baby language, pointing at the couch where she had carefully arranged her toys. I laughed, genuinely and freely, not the tired, forced laugh I had carried for years. It hit me then. This was what independence felt like. It wasn't about money or paperwork alone. It was about reclaiming time, energy, and presence. About being able to fully exist in the moments that mattered most. I took a sip of coffee and pulled out my notebook, the one where I'd drafted boundaries and goals for this new life. I didn't need to fill it with shoulds or musts anymore. I could write things like Saturday mornings at the park with Hole and Lana, weekly self-care, therapy, long shower, uninterrupted sleep, savings plan for future emergencies only for us, family contact on my terms, structured, limited, guilt-free. Even writing those simple things felt revolutionary. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living, designing a life that worked for me and my children, not for anyone else's comfort or expectations. Later that afternoon, the phone buzzed incessantly. Mom, Dad, Wells, all of them, demanding explanations, trying to guilt me, threaten me, even manipulate me emotionally. I silenced it. My first instinct years ago would have been to answer immediately, reassure, placate. Now, I let the messages sit, let them stew, let them realize that the rules had changed. Instead, I took Hull and Lana to the backyard. Hull's laughter echoed as he chased shadows, while Lana toddled after him, squealing with delight. I joined them on the grass, feeling the sun warm my shoulders, listening to their joy. The world was loud, chaotic, messy, and yet, it was ours. Every choice I made from now on was for them and for me. I thought of the spreadsheet again, the ledger of debts and sacrifices. It had been my invisible chains, but now it served a different purpose. A reminder of what I had endured, and proof of what I could overcome. I didn't need to erase the entries, they told my story. I had earned every cent, every hour, every tear. And now, they no longer owned me. The legal consultations went smoothly. Wells was furious at first, storming, threatening, pleading, but even he had to acknowledge reality. I wasn't a bank, a crisis manager, or a financial safety net anymore. My parents eventually contacted the lawyer directly, but the power shift had already occurred. I had drawn the line, and I wasn't moving. One evening, after a long day at the hospital and a quiet bedtime routine, I sat at the kitchen counter, watching Hull and Lana sleep. I reflected on the months leading up to this point, the exhaustion, the frustration, the heartbreak. And I realized something. Independence didn't mean isolation. It didn't mean abandoning family altogether. It meant living life on my terms, with intention, clarity, and boundaries. I imagined the future. Hull learning to ride his bike in the park without worry, Lana's first day of preschool, quiet evenings where I could read or relax without interruption. I saw vacations, small adventures, little moments of peace that had been impossible when my life had been dictated by other people's demands. I saw a life built on choice, not obligation. And then I imagined myself in 5 years, strong, financially secure, emotionally balanced, and surrounded by children who knew that their mother loved them fiercely, but also loved herself. That image brought tears, not of sadness, but of relief. Finally, I was free. I knew this wouldn't be easy. My parents might never understand. Wells might never forgive me for not bailing him out. There would be conflict, yes, tension, maybe even anger. But I didn't need their approval anymore. I had my own, and that was enough. I closed the notebook, sipped the last of my coffee, and stretched, feeling the weight of years lift from my shoulders. Outside, the Dashes River ran steady and indifferent as ever. But inside, my life was flowing for the first time in years exactly as I wanted it to. Hull stirred in his sleep, murmuring something about dinosaurs. Lana's little hands twisted her blanket. I watched them, feeling a sense of peace I had almost forgotten existed. This was more than freedom, it was a new beginning, and I would guard it fiercely, nurture it lovingly, and live it fully. I whispered softly to myself, a vow as much as a promise. No more invisible debts, No more obligations that aren't mine. No more giving until I'm empty. This is our life, our rules, our future. And as I finally allowed myself to relax, to breathe, and to imagine the life we would build, I realized that the hardest part, the part I had feared the most, was also the most rewarding. I had finally claimed my independence. I had finally reclaimed myself, and nothing would ever take it from me again.